The sun had barely risen over the rugged mesas, painting the sky in streaks of amber and crimson, when the sound of hooves echoed across the dusty valley. The wind carried whispers of danger, and even the crows circling high above seemed uneasy. In the heart of the Apache village, behind the thick palisades, she moved with the quiet grace of someone used to watching, listening, waiting. She was no ordinary girl. She was the daughter of the Apache chief, a girl whose eyes held both the fierceness of her people and the restless longing of someone who felt trapped in a world defined by rules she had not chosen. Every step she took was measured, careful, for she knew the eyes of the tribe were always upon her, judging, expecting, demanding loyalty that her heart was not entirely willing to give. The day had started like any other, with the sun warming the earth and the children chasing one another across the camp. But the moment she saw him, everything shifted. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, an outsider, a man whose world was as foreign to her as the distant mountains that framed their homeland. His presence was bold, commanding, and yet there was a gentleness in his gaze that unnerved her. The kind of gentleness that could make a warrior hesitate, make a heart question what it had been told to believe for years. And for her, it was a spark that ignited something dangerous, something that could never be allowed. Every whispered story she had been told about outsiders, about enemies, flashed through her mind. But the pull she felt toward him was stronger than fear, stronger than the rules that bound her. She knew the consequences of what she was feeling. She knew the tribe would never forgive a betrayal of this magnitude. And yet, in his presence, the warnings faded, replaced by a quiet thrill. A yearning she had tried to keep buried deep within her. He did not belong in their world, and she could not belong in his. That was the truth. And the truth, as the elders often said, was a dangerous thing. Even now, as she slipped through the narrow paths between the tipis and the council grounds, she could feel the weight of her father's expectations pressing down on her. The Apache chief was a man of honor and unshakable will, a leader whose word was law and whose anger was feared more than any storm that swept through the plains. To disappoint him would be to invite the wrath of not just a father, but a whole people, yet for reasons she could not name. She found herself drawn to a path that led straight into that danger. The first time their hands touched, it had been accidental, or so it seemed. A brush in the shadows of the trading post, a fleeting moment when neither the sun nor the tribe could see them. But in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of a shared loneliness, shared defiance of the worlds that had been built around them. That brief contact became a memory she could not shake. A whisper in the night that called her to risk everything. Rumors in the village began to stir almost immediately, carried by sharp eyes and sharper tongues. The elders noticed her lingering glances and the way her laughter sometimes faltered when she returned from the outskirts. And the men of the tribe, proud and loyal, began to murmur questions she could not answer. She felt the walls closing in, felt the eyes of the entire tribe upon her, as if every tree and every stone could bear witness to her thoughts. She knew she had to be careful, yet each step toward him felt inevitable, like a river carving its course through the land. Even he sensed it. The outsider, though unaware of the full danger, could see that her world was filled with rules she could not fully escape. He admired her courage, her fire, and he could feel the tension that surrounded her like a cloak of thorns. They met in secret, under the veil of twilight, where the stars hid their rendezvous. Every stolen moment was electric, full of whispered promises and quiet warnings. A delicate balance between desire and doom, but danger is rarely content to wait in silence. The tribe's scouts were vigilant, their loyalty unwavering, and it was only a matter of time before suspicion grew into certainty. And when it did, the wrath of the Apache would fall not just upon an outsider, but upon the girl who had dared to love him. She could picture the council's judgment, the stern faces of the elders, the disappointment and fury in her father's eyes. She could almost hear the drums pounding in the distance. A warning and a call to arms. Despite the fear, despite the risk, she could not turn away. Each encounter, each quiet smile shared across the moonlit plains, tethered her heart closer to him. Every night, As the village settled into silence, she lay awake, listening to the wind, imagining the life they could never have, and wondering if love could ever truly conquer duty. And in those long hours, she realized that the world she had been born into was unforgiving, and yet, the one she yearned for offered a freedom she had never known. The first sign of trouble came with a single word. Carried by the wind from the edge of the canyon, "Stranger," was whispered at first. A warning passed from one scout to another, then spoken aloud, urgent and trembling. Someone had seen them together. Someone who could not understand why a chief's daughter would risk everything for a man from a different world. And just like that, the fragile safety of their hidden meetings vanished. She felt it immediately, a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night, fear that gripped her chest and would not let go. He sensed it too, a subtle change in the way she moved. The quick glance over her shoulder, the tightening of her fingers around his, and in that moment, they both understood the time for caution was over. The tribe would come, and when they did, there would be no hiding. No words to explain what the heart cannot understand. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of smoke from a distant fire, and with it, the unmistakable sound of urgency, hoofbeats, voices, and the rhythmic chant of men preparing for a hunt. The ground seemed to tremble beneath them, and the world they had tried to carve out in secret began to crumble. Every decision she had made, every stolen glance and whispered promise, was about to meet the unforgiving judgment of a people who would protect their own at any cost. And yet, even with the danger closing in, her heart would not relent. She knew the path ahead was impossible, that the consequences could be fatal, that the love she carried could ignite a storm unlike any the plains had ever seen. But she could not turn back, could not deny the pull that had brought her to this moment. The Apache chief's daughter and the outsider, two souls, bound by a fleeting, dangerous love, stood on the edge of a fate neither fully understood. And as the shadows lengthened and the first calls of pursuit echoed through the canyons, the story that had begun in whispers and longing was about to erupt into a pursuit that would test every instinct, every loyalty, and every heartbeat. And there, on the rim of the canyon, with the sun sinking behind the jagged horizon, she faced the impossible: to flee or to fight, to survive or to surrender to the world that would never forgive her. The wind howled as if echoing the question, and somewhere in the valley below, the first scouts caught sight of them. In that instant, the quiet promise of love collided with the unyielding force of tradition, and nothing would ever be the same. The night held its breath. The stars blinked in silent judgment, and somewhere deep in the heart of the tribe, the drums began to call. The first cries of alarm had barely faded when the daughter of the Apache chief felt the ground beneath her vibrate with the approach of determined feet and pounding hooves. The valley, usually alive with the quiet rhythm of the desert, seemed suddenly hostile, every shadow a possible threat. Her pulse quickened, and she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mix of fear and defiance. She had known this day would come, yet knowing did little to ease the dread that clung to her like a second skin. They had met in secrecy for weeks, careful to avoid notice, but whispers traveled faster than footsteps in the desert. Some called it curiosity, some called it recklessness. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She had allowed her heart to lead. Her ware caution had warned against going. The outsider standing beside her shifted uneasily, scanning the tree line and the ridges for any sign of pursuit. He was a man of skill and knowledge, yet he had never faced a fury like that of an entire tribe. And she feared he did not fully grasp the storm that approached. She remembered the first time she had seen him. Months before, at the edge of the trading post, where outsiders came and went like wandering clouds. He had been alone, tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to look past the surface of things, as though he could see the world differently than she ever had. There had been no introductions, no formalities, just a moment, fleeting and electric, that neither of them could forget. And from that moment, she had known that life inside the tribe, with all its rules and traditions, could no longer contain her. The Apache had lived on these lands for generations, bound to the mountains, the rivers, and the open plains. Their ways were strict, but just, and the chief, her father, was a man of legend in the surrounding regions. His decisions were respected, even feared, and his daughter had grown under the weight of that authority. Every lesson, every warning, every story of the tribe's past had shaped her. She knew the names of warriors and scouts, the history of every skirmish, the precise meaning of every drumbeat and signal. Yet the one lesson she could not obey was the command of her own heart. The outsider had learned slowly, cautiously about her people. He asked questions at first, careful not to offend, and observed the ways of the Apache with a mixture of respect and fascination. But over time, he began to understand the stakes. He had grown up with different rules. In a world where borders and ownership were defined by documents and guns rather than honor and loyalty, he admired her courage, and though he knew the danger of their closeness, he could not turn away now. As the first signs of pursuit began to appear, glints of metal, faint voices, the beat of hooves on the rocky ground, she realized the severity of what they had done. The Apache were disciplined hunters, trained to track anything across the harshest landscapes, and once their minds had been set on a goal, there was no room for hesitation. Their determination was relentless, and she knew that if they caught even a trace of her movements, it would mean the wrath of her own people as they moved through the canyon. Weaving between boulders and clinging to shadows, her mind raced. She thought of her father, his stern face, the weight of his expectations, the pride he took in the strength and obedience of his people. Could he understand why she had chosen this path? Could anyone? She doubted it. Even the elders, wise and patient, would see only betrayal, never the longing that had driven her to these moments of secret defiance. The outsider glanced at her, sensing the storm within her mind. "We can't stay in the open," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "They'll find us if we linger." She nodded, her heart hammering, and led the way through a narrow passage between two jagged rocks, hoping the terrain would give them some advantage. She knew every nook and hidden path of the canyon, every place where the wind could hide their scent, every shadow that could shield them from sight. The desert was her home, but even familiarity could not erase the fear. She felt the invisible net closing around them, each moment stretching longer with anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. The story of her family flashed in her mind. Her mother, long gone, had been a woman of wisdom and quiet strength, who had taught her that love could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. Her father, the chief, had risen to leadership through bravery, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty to the tribe. Their lives had been shaped by struggle and sacrifice. She knew that her choices were now part of that legacy, for better or worse. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she was standing on a line drawn between tradition and desire, between duty and freedom. They paused briefly by a narrow stream that cut through the desert, the water sparkling faintly in the fading light. She knelt to cup it in her hands, feeling the cold rush over her palms, and looked into the reflection of the sky above. He followed her lead, and for a brief moment felt as if the world had stopped, suspended in a fragile bubble between the hunt and the hunted. "Why risk everything for me?" he asked softly, his voice almost swallowed by the wind. She did not answer immediately. She thought of the long nights alone, of the weight of tradition pressing down on her, the unspoken longing she could no longer deny. "Because I cannot not," she whispered finally. "Because some things are bigger than fear, bigger than the rules we are given. I cannot live in a world where I deny who I am inside." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words, though he could not fully comprehend the depth of the danger. He reached out, taking her hand briefly, and the contact sent a shiver through both of them. They had no illusions about the path ahead. Every step would be perilous, every choice fraught with risk, but in that touch they found a fleeting courage, a small spark of hope. The shadows of the canyon grew longer as night began to fall, and with darkness came a new layer of tension. The Apache scouts were skilled in moving silently, and the sounds of pursuit were subtle, nearly imperceptible. She could hear the occasional snap of a branch, the rustle of fabric against the brush, faint signals that reminded her the chase had already begun. And yet the night also offered them cover, a chance to vanish into the labyrinth of stone and sand. If only they moved wisely, her mind drifted to the stories of old, of love and loss among the Apache, of forbidden desires that had led to ruin or triumph. She wondered if this would be one of those stories remembered in whispers for generations, or if it would end in tragedy before it even had a chance to bloom. The thought only made her grip tighter on his hand, as if holding on could somehow change fate. The canyon opened into a wider plain, and she froze for a moment, sensing that their pursuers might already be near. She scanned the horizon, spotting the faint glimmer of firelight on the distant ridge, a signal that someone had been watching them all along, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her heart pounded, and she felt the weight of every decision she had made pressing down like the heavy heat of the desert sun at noon. They moved cautiously, keeping low, avoiding the open spaces where visibility could betray them. Every rock, every dip in the terrain, every shadow was a potential lifeline. Yet even with her knowledge of the land, she knew that the tribe's determination could overcome any advantage of terrain or skill. Their pursuit would not relent, and each step they took carried them closer to a confrontation that neither could fully anticipate. In the distance, a lone hawk circled, its cry sharp and piercing, a reminder of the wildness of the land and the consequences of stepping outside its rules. The daughter of the chief felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, knowing that this night could define her life forever. She glanced at the outsider, whose face was set with a mix of determination and uncertainty, and realized that whatever happened next, there was no turning back. And so, under the darkening sky, they pressed on, moving like shadows themselves, hearts racing, senses alert, caught in a delicate balance between love and danger. The canyon walls echoed with the faint sound of pursuit, a promise that the hunt was only beginning. Every step forward was a test, every choice a potential turning point, and the night seemed endless, stretching before them with the weight of unspoken threats as the first stars appeared overhead, glimmering coldly against the black expanse. The daughter of the Apache chief understood the truth she had been avoiding. They were running not just from the tribe, but from a world that would never accept them. And yet, running was not enough. Survival would demand courage, cunning, perhaps sacrifices they had not yet imagined. Somewhere ahead, the faint glimmer of torchlight danced along the edges of the rocks. The hunt was coming closer, and with it, the full force of the tribe's wrath. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill her lungs, and knew that the choices they made in the next moments could change everything. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every heartbeat pulled her toward the impossible, toward the man who had captured her heart, toward the life she had dared to imagine in defiance of the world around her. The canyon held its secrets tightly. The night stretched endlessly, and somewhere in the shadows, their pursuers closed in. Relentless and unforgiving, the daughter of the chief and the outsider pressed on, aware that the chase was far from over. And as the wind carried the distant drum beats of the tribe, she understood that nothing could prepare them for what was coming. And every moment now held the tension of a story that had only just begun. If you want, I can continue the story into the next chapter, where the first confrontation with the tribe begins. Increasing the suspense and showing how their relationship and survival are tested, the night had deepened over the canyon, stretching the shadows into long, twisting shapes that seemed to follow them as they moved. The daughter of the Apache chief pressed her hand against the cool rock, listening. Every rustle of wind, every snap of a twig was magnified in the quiet, and she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. The outsider moved close beside her, his face set in a mask of concentration. Yet even he could not hide the tension that crept into his shoulders. They were being hunted. Every instinct told them that the tribe would not stop until they had answered Zora punishment. She remembered the stories her father had told of battles fought to protect the people, of warriors who had tracked their enemies for days across the harshest terrain. The Apache were relentless in their pursuit, guided not just by skill, but by a deep, unbreakable sense of loyalty to their own. And now, she realized with a chill that ran through her, that loyalty had been turned toward her. She had become the center of a storm, and the man she had chosen to be with was caught in the eye of it. As they moved cautiously through the rocks and scrub, she began to think of the tribe from a different perspective, the hunters she had grown up respecting, who had always been part of her life. Among them were warriors who had laughed with her, scolded her, and shared stories by the fire. Some had known her since she was a child, and now they had been tasked with tracking her. The thought twisted her stomach, for she understood that this hunt was not just about obedience to the chief, it was about justice, honor, and the fear of betrayal. In the shadows, the outsider spoke in low tones. "We need to decide where to go next. They'll be everywhere soon." His voice betrayed worry, but also determination. He had begun to understand her world, the weight of the traditions and expectations that surrounded her. But even his careful observation could not fully predict the lengths to which her people would go to reclaim what they saw as lost. They paused near a narrow ledge that overlooked a dry riverbed, and she peered down at the darkened plain. Below she could see movement, small flickers of light as the scouts advanced, their steps methodical and unhurried, confident in their advantage. Even from this distance, their discipline was clear, their strategy precise. The tribe did not rush into a chase blindly. They planned, calculated, and waited for the right moment to strike. "I should never have left," she whispered, almost to herself, the words catching in her throat. The outsider put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "We are here now," he said quietly, "and we'll face it together. We can't undo the past, but we can try to survive the present." She nodded, yet the words did little to calm the storm inside her. Survival was one thing, but understanding what she had done to the tribe, to her father, to herself, was another. She could already imagine the council at the village, the stern faces of elders, the whispered arguments about what must be done to restore honor. She could imagine her father's gaze, fierce and unyielding, full of disappointment and hurt. Meanwhile in the village, the elders had already convened. They spoke in hushed tones, debating the best course of action. To them, the chief's daughter was precious, not just because of her bloodline, but because of the responsibility she carried to uphold the tribe's traditions. Her choices, reckless or not, reflected on them all. Some argued that a warning would suffice, that she should be brought back and counseled. Others, more strict, insisted that her love for the outsider represented a betrayal too deep to forgive. The discussions were heated, but all shared one certainty: the matter could not be ignored. Back in the canyon, she and the outsider navigated the labyrinth of rocks with careful precision. Every movement required thought. Every pause could mean discovery. Yet even in the danger, moments of clarity and reflection came. She thought of the man's hands, strong but gentle, of the way he had listened without judgment, and of the rare sense of safety she felt when he was near. In the midst of chaos and threat, their connection had grown quietly. Like a fragile flame in a storm, the wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint smell of smoke. She froze, heart hammering, listening. The smell was distant, but unmistakable, and it brought with it the harsh reality that the tribe's scouts were not far behind. Every step now could be watched, every misstep noticed. She knew the desert would not forgive mistakes, and the mountains offered little shelter from determined eyes. She led them through a hidden passage she had discovered as a child, a narrow crevice that opened into a small, sheltered alcove. They crouched there, breathless, listening to the quiet hum of the desert night. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they might escape detection, as though the world could pause long enough for them to breathe. But even in this brief reprieve, other tensions began to surface. He was new to these lands, and while he had adapted quickly, she realized that his understanding of her people was still incomplete. They disagreed quietly about the best path forward. Each suggestion weighed against instinct, experience, and fear. It was a small conflict, but it mirrored the larger danger: they were two worlds trying to navigate a third. And every choice carried consequences neither fully understood. The daughter of the chief thought of her childhood friends, of the boys and girls who had grown up alongside her, and wondered what they would think if they could see her now. Some would feel anger, others betrayal, and a few might even understand the longing she had tried to bury. She realized how much she had changed, and how little the outside world would allow her freedom. Even the mountains, which had always been a place of solace, seemed to press closer, reminding her of boundaries she could not cross. Above, the stars twinkled coldly, and she considered the stories of old that spoke of love tested by impossible circumstances. Those tales often ended in tragedy, yet they carried lessons of courage, defiance, and endurance. She wondered if her own story would be remembered as one of loss, or as one of quiet triumph in the face of impossible odds. The thought was bittersweet, but it steeled her resolve. From another angle, the outsider considered his own fears. He had entered this world without fully realizing the weight of what he was stepping into. He was an intruder by birth and circumstance, and now he stood shoulder to shoulder with someone who belonged to a people who would not forgive easily. Yet he felt a strange sense of purpose. Protecting her was no longer just a choice. It had become a responsibility he could not abandon, no matter the danger. The night deepened, and the sounds of pursuit grew closer. A distant shout, muffled but clear enough, echoed through the canyon, followed by the rhythmic beating of drums that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The tribe was closing in, and every instinct screamed that hiding alone would not be enough. They needed a plan, yet every plan carried risk. Every decision could reveal their position. Every pause could allow the hunters to anticipate their movements. In the midst of tension, she also began to notice the small details of the land, the way the rocks could shield their scent, the way the wind carried sound across the canyon, the hidden paths that only she could recognize. Her knowledge was their advantage, but even so it was fragile. One mistake, one misstep, and the pursuit would be upon them with unstoppable force. As the hours passed, exhaustion began to creep in. Every nerve was on edge, every shadow a potential threat, and yet neither of them could stop. The canyon seemed endless, the night unyielding, and the hunters relentless. She realized that survival required more than skill. It required instinct, courage, and a willingness to face consequences she could barely imagine. Even with the danger, there were moments of fleeting humanity. A glance, a whispered word, a shared breath reminded them both why they had chosen this path. They were not merely running from the tribe, they were running toward something neither fully understood. A connection that defied tradition, geography, and expectation. Yet every heartbeat carried the knowledge that discovery was inevitable, and somewhere in the shadows, the drums continued to beat, a reminder of the inevitable confrontation that awaited them. The daughter of the chief and the outsider pressed forward, hearts intertwined yet separate, aware that every step forward was a step deeper into danger. The canyon held its secrets tightly, the night seemed endless, and the hunt had only just begun. If you want, I can continue the next 1,200-word section where the first major confrontation with the tribe begins. In subplots like the elders' plans and scouts, perspectives deepen the story further while keeping the suspense high. The night pressed heavier round them as the canyon narrowed, walls rising like silent sentinels, holding their secrets close. The daughter of the Apache chief moved ahead cautiously, her eyes scanning every shadow, every rock outcropping, every flicker of movement. She could feel the rhythm of pursuit growing stronger, like a heartbeat she could not escape. The outsider followed close behind, muscles tense, senses stretched to their limits. Neither spoke. 4 words now were dangerous. Every sound could be carried by the night wind and betray their position. The air was thick with anticipation. Each step forward, a calculated risk. The moon had risen partially, casting silver light that made some paths visible while plunging others into deeper shadow. She led him through a narrow cleft in the canyon wall, a place she remembered from childhood where no scout could follow without making noise. The ground beneath their feet crunched softly, and each footfall was a reminder of how close the hunters were. Somewhere above, the faint glint of metal caught the moonlight, and she froze, listening. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the wind. "I did," she replied, her throat tight, heart pounding. "We have to keep moving. They are close, closer than we think." Her mind raced back to the village, to the council of elders plotting, to her father. whose eyes would not just see betrayal, they would feel it. She had grown up understanding the weight of his judgment, the weight of the tribe's expectations, and yet in the quiet moments of fear and desperation, she felt a strange thrill at the rebellion that pulsed through her veins. She was caught between worlds, between duty and desire. And now that tension had reached a point that could not be ignored. The outsider glanced around the canyon walls. Realizing how little he truly understood about the terrain, he had learned much from her, but this was her world, and he had only begun to glimpse its dangers. "We can't keep running blindly," he said. "They will find us if we continue like this." She shook her head. "I know the land better than anyone. We will use it to our advantage, but we have to be smart. One wrong step, and it could end everything." A distant cry reached them, muffled yet sharp, carried down the canyon. It was the signal that the scouts had found something, that the hunt was narrowing in on them. Her stomach twisted. Every choice now could lead to disaster. Every pause could be their undoing. She had hoped to stay ahead, to outsmart the hunters. But the sheer determination of her people was formidable, and the bond between the chief's daughter and the outsider was about to be tested as never before. As they advanced, the canyon opened briefly to a high plateau, and she paused to look out over the valley below. There, in the faint moonlight, she could see small figures moving, torches flickering like distant fireflies. The realization hit her with a force she could barely breathe through. The tribe had split, surrounding them from multiple directions. The drums beat again, steady and ominous, carrying across the rocks like a warning. The hunt was no longer subtle. It was imminent. She took a deep breath and led the way to a narrow ledge that overlooked a dry riverbed, hoping the elevation would give them a momentary advantage. "We have to move quickly," she whispered. "We might be able to reach the cliffs beyond before they close in." He nodded, but she saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. He had faced danger before, but never the disciplined, coordinated pursuit of an entire people, and now he understood that instinct alone would not save them. "I'm with you," he said, "but we have to be careful. Every choice matters." The tension between them was a mixture of fear and unspoken trust. Even in the darkness, in the midst of peril, there was a strange intimacy in their shared silence. A bond forged in the heat of impossible circumstances. Yet that bond was fragile, tested with every step by the relentless advance of the tribe below. She remembered the stories her father had told of warriors who had been caught unprepared, of love and loyalty tested by impossible circumstances. The tales had always carried lessons of courage and consequences, and now she was living one of those stories, aware that any misstep could change everything. She felt the weight of her bloodline, the eyes of the elders, the judgment of the council, and yet the pull of her heart was stronger than any fear from another angle. The scouts in the canyon moved with practiced precision, spreading out, their movements silent and purposeful. Among them was a young warrior who had known her since she was a child, whose loyalty was absolute. Yet even he struggled with the conflict between duty and memory, between the loyalty he owed to the chief and the affection he had once held for the girl he had watched grow up. His thoughts were clouded by confusion and tension, and in the shadows, he wondered if this pursuit was justice or something far more complicated. The night air carried the faint scent of smoke again, and she stiffened. Someone had started a signal fire, meant to coordinate the tribe's movements and ensure no escape. She realized the complexity of the hunt, how every move they had made had been anticipated, and a new layer of fear crept in. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and the margin for error had vanished. The outsider's hand found hers briefly. A silent gesture of reassurance and shared resolve. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together." She nodded, feeling both comforted and terrified. Their bond had grown quietly, forged in stolen moments and whispered conversations. Yet now it was about to face the ultimate test. The canyon itself seemed to close around them, shadows thickening, sounds of pursuit growing sharper, closer. Every rock, every crevice, every ridge could conceal their enemies or betray them. A sudden movement caught her eye, a flicker of shadow that moved faster than the wind. She froze, heart hammering, and realized that a scout had spotted them, but perhaps too late to give the signal. The outsider followed her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended. The weight of anticipation pressing down with suffocating intensity. Every instinct screamed to act, every thought raced for a solution. And yet the danger was immediate and unavoidable. They descended carefully to the riverbed below, keeping low, hoping the uneven terrain would provide some cover. The scouts spread further, coordinating silently while the sound of drums and distant calls echoed through the canyon. The daughter of the chief understood that this hunt was not simply about finding them, it was about proving a point, about restoring honor and order that had been disrupted by forbidden desire. From her perspective, every moment was a lesson in survival, every choice a test of cunning. She guided the outsider through hidden paths, past rocky ridges and over dry creek beds, using every trick she had learned in childhood. The land itself seemed to respond, shadows bending, terrain twisting in ways that gave them fleeting advantage. Yet she knew it would not last. The tribe's persistence was unmatched, their knowledge of the land nearly equal to her own. Above them, the moon had risen higher, illuminating parts of the canyon with stark, cold light. Their shadows stretched long, and she realized with a jolt that they could now be seen from multiple angles. The hunt was closing in, surrounding them, and the next move could decide everything. She glanced at the outsider, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed with anticipation. They were on the edge, teetering between escape and capture. Every heartbeat was a countdown to confrontation. The wind shifted again, carrying distant voices, low but unmistakable. The scouts were near, converging silently, and the drums pounded faster, a relentless signal that the trap was closing. She felt a shiver run down her spine, part fear, part adrenaline, part the sharp excitement of standing at the edge of something impossible. They paused at a rocky overhang, crouching low, listening. She traced the shapes of the approaching figures, counting, estimating, calculating. The outsider whispered a suggestion, but she shook her head, trusting her knowledge of the terrain over instinct alone. Every path, every rock, every crevice mattered. One misstep, and they would be surrounded. The tension reached its peak as they moved carefully along the ledge. A sudden shout erupted from below. A scout had spotted them definitively. The drums rose in volume, voices carried commands, and the night seemed to vibrate with impending action. Her heart raced, and she realized that the moment they had been fleeing toward was now upon them. There would be no more hiding, no more careful maneuvering. The canyon itself would bear witness to the confrontation, and every secret path, every shadow, every choice made in desperation would matter. She took a deep breath, gripping the outsider's hand tightly, feeling the tremor in both of them. This was the precipice, the edge of everything they had fought to preserve. The point where courage, cunning, and defiance would collide with relentless pursuit. The tribe was closing in, the hunters determined, and the night seemed to hold its breath as the final moments before confrontation approached. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone hawk cried out, its call sharp and piercing, echoing through the canyon like a warning. She felt a strange clarity, the weight of every choice, every stolen moment, every heartbeat pressing down on her. They were running toward the impossible, toward a danger they could not fully escape, and the tension in the air was electric. The daughter of the chief and the outsider pressed forward, every step deliberate, every sense alert. The canyon seemed alive with anticipation, the hunters closing, the drums echoing, and the night thick with the promise of a clash that could change everything. The moment of reckoning was near, and the story of forbidden love, loyalty, and impossible desire was poised on the brink of its most intense chapter. If you want, I can continue the next 1,200 words where the confrontation begins, showing multiple perspectives, the suspense exploding, and the story reaching its absolute climax before any resolution is revealed. The night exploded into chaos as the first scouts rounded the bend, their torches casting flickering light across the rocky canyon walls. The daughter of the Apache chief felt her heart pound against her ribs, a rhythm that matched the drums echoing through the valley. She crouched low beside the outsider, gripping his arm, both of them pressed against the stone like shadows themselves. Every step, every sound carried the weight of consequence, And then, in the sudden flash of movement, the confrontation began. The scouts moved quickly, disciplined, circling them with practiced precision. They were not cruel, not unnecessarily violent. They were loyal, determined, and intent on fulfilling their duty. The chief's daughter understood this all too well. She had been part of these hunts in the past, seen how the tribe could work as one seamless unit. Now, however, she was on the other side, the target, the spark that had ignited their pursuit. The outsider, though tense, did not falter. He followed her lead, trusting her knowledge of the land. Her instincts honed from a lifetime within the tribe's rules. Voices rang out from above and below. Commands passed quickly, efficiently. Her father's voice, commanding yet strained with emotion, joined the chorus, echoing off the cliffs. She froze at first, seeing his figure silhouetted by the torchlight atop a ridge. His eyes were sharp, searching, but they were not filled with the fury she had feared. Instead, they carried a mixture of disappointment, concern, and something softer, almost unspoken. It was a look that told her that even in judgment, there was room for understanding. The outsider whispered a question, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "What do we do now?" She shook her head slightly, taking a deep breath. "We do what we should have done from the beginning. We face them, we explain, and we hope our hearts speak louder than the rules we've broken." They stepped forward, leaving their hidden alcove, and the scouts paused, unsure of the audacity of their movements. The drums beat louder, faster, a warning that the chase was not over. Yet here they were, choosing visibility over concealment. She could see her father descend the ridge, his gait firm, unyielding yet measured. The chief had always believed in strength, yes, but also in the wisdom to temper it with understanding. As the chief's daughter and the outsider approached the gathered tribe, she felt the tension in the air like a living thing. The elders stepped forward, their expressions stern yet thoughtful. They spoke quietly among themselves, casting glances her way. It was clear that the council had debated what to do, weighing honor against compassion, loyalty against love. In that moment, she realized the depth of her tribe's humanity, not just discipline, but wisdom, patience, and the willingness to listen. Her father stopped a few steps from them, raising a hand. Silence fell. The crackling of torches, the night wind, the distant call of animals, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, yet carried the authority of a man whose word had always shaped the lives of those around him. "You have risked much," he said, eyes fixed on his daughter, "and the rules we follow exist for the safety of all. Yet, I see the courage in your heart and the truth of your choice." The words struck her like sunlight after a long night. She had feared condemnation, punishment, exile even, but here was acknowledgement, tempered with guidance. Her gaze fell to the outsider, who stood silently, eyes wide but respectful, understanding the gravity of the moment. Her father's scrutiny passed over him, measuring his heart, his intentions, and perhaps seeing the same spark of bravery that had led him to this impossible path. One of the elders stepped forward, voice low but steady. "Love cannot be forced, nor can loyalty be commanded against the heart. But all actions have consequences. You have risked the tribe's trust, yet you have also shown honesty in your choice. That honesty must guide the way forward." The daughter of the chief swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words. The tribe was offering a chance, a path to reconciliation, rather than immediate judgment. It was not forgiveness without effort, it was a challenge to prove that their actions were honorable, despite their defiance. She looked at the outsider and felt a surge of relief, tempered by the understanding that their journey was far from over. Her father nodded slowly, stepping closer, the torchlight catching the lines of his face. "You must show that your hearts align with respect for our people and our ways. You will not be punished, but you must walk a path of understanding, proving that your love does not bring dishonor, but strength." Relief flooded through her, but it was careful, measured relief. The weight of the chase, the fear of betrayal, and the risk they had faced was still present. They had survived the night. But the journey ahead required more than courage, it required patience, wisdom, and continued respect for the tribe she loved, The scouts began to relax, forming a semicircle that allowed passage and space for understanding. Among them, the young warrior who had struggled with his own feelings for her now lowered his gaze in quiet acceptance. He had feared betrayal, yet he could see the sincerity in her eyes, the strength of her choices. In that moment, the subtle threads of loyalty and trust began to weave themselves back together. Stronger for the test they had endured, the outsider knelt briefly, a gesture of respect toward the chief and the elders. It was understood without words, the recognition of the tribe's rules, the acknowledgement of the courage it took to challenge them, and the willingness to walk within the bounds of honor even while forging a new path. He stood, and for the first time that night, she felt a quiet certainty that they might be able to navigate the impossible together. The chief's daughter finally spoke, her voice steady despite the exhaustion and adrenaline that clung to her. "I understand now that love alone is not enough. It must be balanced with respect, with honor, with the wisdom of those who came before us. I will carry that with me every step of the way." Her father's eyes softened, stern lines of leadership giving way to the warmth of a father who understood the weight of choice. "Then you have begun to learn the hardest lesson of all. Courage is not simply facing danger, is facing responsibility, and carrying it with honesty." The drums quieted. The scouts lowered their weapons slightly, and the tension that had held the canyon in its grip began to ease. The wind shifted, carrying the cool scent of dawn from the distant plains. A new day was approaching, one filled with uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. The night had tested them, the tribe had been challenged, and yet here they stood, together, having faced the impossible and emerged not broken, but with a greater understanding of themselves and each other. The daughter of the chief glanced at the outsider, and he smiled faintly, tired but unwavering. Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, they shared a quiet triumph, the knowledge that love, respect, and courage could coexist, even in the harshest of worlds. The lessons of the night would linger, shaping their choices, guiding their steps, and reminding them that the heart, though fragile, could withstand even the fiercest storms. In the distance, the village began to stir, the faint sounds of morning life mingling with the desert wind. She felt the weight of her tribe's gaze, not as judgment, but as a reminder of the balance she now carried. The elders and the scouts, her father and the young warrior who had once doubted her, all watched with cautious approval. The impossible path had been walked, and the bonds between worlds, between hearts, had been tested and strengthened. The sun began to crest over the horizon, painting the cliffs and canyon walls in gold and rose. She breathed in the air, feeling the tension drain slowly, replaced with a quiet clarity. The chase had ended, the confrontation resolved. And yet the story of what had been faced would remain, a memory etched into the land, the tribe, and the hearts of those who had lived it. Her father stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have learned well," he said softly, "and now it is time to live the lessons you have earned. Walk with courage, and remember that your choices shape not just your path, but the strength of those around you." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The outsider looked at her, his eyes reflecting both relief and determination. Together, they had survived the impossible, faced the judgment of a tribe, and discovered that love, tempered with respect and understanding, could endure even the harshest trials. As they began the slow walk back toward the village, the desert awakening around them, she felt the quiet triumph of a journey completed, of tension resolved, and of hearts tested and strengthened. The night's terror and pursuit would linger in memory, but it would no longer define them. They had faced the impossible, survived the hunt, and emerged with a deeper understanding of love, loyalty, and courage. The drums of the tribe faded into the distance, replaced by the soft, rising chorus of morning life, the birds, the wind, the faint murmur of the village coming to life. She took one last look at the canyon that had been both trap and sanctuary, and understood that this was a beginning as much as it was an ending. The lessons learned here would guide every step forward, a reminder that the heart, though challenged, could endure, and as the sun climbed higher, casting warmth across the land, she felt a quiet peace, a sense of harmony with the tribe she loved, the man she had chosen, and the path she would walk with courage, honesty, and hope. The impossible had been faced, and while the journey continued, the night's trials had left them stronger, wiser, and more determined to face whatever came next. The daughter of the Apache. Chief and the outsider moved together toward the rising light. Side by side, carrying with them the lessons of the night, the strength of their hearts, and the knowledge that even in a world bound by rules and tradition, courage and love could carve a path forward.